I never imagined my life could spiral out of control so quickly, especially with someone I trusted. But that night, as I stood outside his bedroom door, heart pounding and palms sweating, I knew nothing would ever be the same again. What started as an innocent moment turned into something I couldn't stop, no matter how wrong it felt. And now, I can't escape the weight of what we did. Emma and David had always been the couple others admired, stable, loving, and devoted. Married for 7 years, they had built a life filled with quiet evenings, shared dreams, and trust, or so Emma thought. David's demanding career often pulled him away, leaving Emma to spend more time alone in their spacious suburban home. Despite the distance, Emma never questioned his love. She believed their bond was unshakable, even as the gaps between their conversations grew wider. She filled her days with work, hobbies, and occasional dinners with friends, but the nights felt heavier, lonelier. When David's younger cousin, Ryan, moved in temporarily to attend college nearby, Emma welcomed the distraction. At just 19, Ryan was polite, charming, and full of youthful energy. He reminded Emma of simpler times, before bills and responsibilities weighed her down. David had insisted they help Ryan settle in, and Emma agreed without hesitation. She liked having someone around to break the silence in the house, someone who laughed easily and seemed genuinely interested in her stories. Ryan quickly became comfortable in their home. He helped with chores, made her laugh, and even cooked dinner a few times. Emma saw him as family, someone she could mentor and support as he adjusted to adulthood. But as the weeks passed, Emma began to notice subtle changes, moments that made her question the nature of their growing bond. Ryan's compliments lingered a little longer than necessary. His gaze seemed more intense, and his casual touches began to feel deliberate. At first, Emma brushed it off, convincing herself she was imagining things. She told herself he was just being kind, that she was reading too much into his actions. But the more time they spent together, the harder it became to ignore the tension simmering beneath the surface. One evening, as they cooked dinner side by side, Ryan's hand brushed against hers, sending a jolt through her body. She quickly pulled away, but the moment lingered, echoing in her mind long after she went to bed. Emma couldn't deny the shift any longer. Something was happening, something she wasn't ready to face. And with David away on another business trip, the lines between right and wrong began to blur. Emma tried to push the strange feelings aside, but Ryan's presence seemed to follow her everywhere. His voice lingered in her thoughts, and his easy laughter echoed in her ears long after their conversations ended. She told herself it was harmless, just her imagination running wild. After all, Ryan was family. But as the days passed, the tension grew harder to ignore. Little things began to stand out, like the way Ryan's eyes would linger on her when he thought she wasn't looking, or the subtle touches that seemed accidental but left her skin tingling. One evening, Emma found herself alone in the living room, curled up with a book she wasn't really reading. Ryan walked in, his hair slightly damp from a shower, wearing a fitted t-shirt and sweatpants that hugged his lean frame. "Hey," he said casually, flopping down on the couch across from her. "Hey," she replied, forcing a smile and pretending not to notice the way her pulse quickened. They talked about his classes, his plans for the weekend, and his struggles to adjust to life in the city. But Emma couldn't help noticing how close he was sitting, closer than before. At one point, Ryan reached over to grab the remote, and his arm brushed against her leg. The touch was brief, but it sent a spark through her body that left her breathless. "Sorry," he said, but his smile told her he wasn't. "It's fine," she replied, her voice softer than she intended. Later that night, Emma lay in bed, replaying the moment over and over. She told herself she was overreacting, that Ryan was just being friendly, but deep down she knew better. The next morning, Ryan offered to make breakfast. Emma watched him move confidently around the kitchen, his sleeves rolled up and his muscles flexing with every movement. She caught herself staring and quickly looked away, her cheeks flushing. "You okay?" he asked, catching her off guard. "Yeah, just tired," she lied, avoiding his gaze. But Ryan didn't let it go. He stepped closer, leaning against the counter with a look that made Emma's heart race. "You sure? You seem distracted." "I'm fine," she insisted, but her voice betrayed her. The more she tried to distance herself, the closer Ryan seemed to get. He found reasons to be near her, helping with dishes, asking for advice, or just hanging around in the living room while she worked. One evening, Emma decided to go for a walk to clear her head. But as she reached the front door, Ryan appeared behind her. "Going somewhere?" "Just for a walk," she replied, trying to sound casual. "Mind if I join you?" She hesitated but nodded, unable to come up with a reason to say no. They walked in silence at first, the cool evening air doing little to calm her racing thoughts. But then Ryan spoke, his voice low and steady. "You know, you're really easy to talk to," he said. Emma glanced at him, her heart pounding. "Thanks. I try. I mean it," he continued. "You're different from other people. You actually listen." Emma felt a lump rise in her throat. The sincerity in his voice was disarming, and she found herself smiling despite the warning bells going off in her head. When they returned home, Ryan lingered at the doorway, his eyes meeting hers in a way that made her breath catch. "Good night," he said softly. "Good night," she replied, but her voice wavered. As she watched him walk away, Emma knew she was in trouble. The boundaries she had tried so hard to maintain were beginning to crumble, and she wasn't sure she wanted to stop it. Emma tried to keep her distance after that night, but it was impossible. Ryan was everywhere, helping with chores, brushing past her in the kitchen, and filling the house with his easy laughter. She told herself it was just a phase, that she was overthinking things. But the way her pulse raced whenever he was near told a different story. One evening, Emma was folding laundry in the living room when Ryan came in, barefoot and casually dressed. He flopped onto the couch and stretched out, his shirt lifting just enough to reveal a hint of his toned stomach. "You've been quiet today," he said, his voice soft but probing. "Just tired," Emma replied, refusing to look at him. But Ryan didn't buy it. He sat up, leaning closer. "You sure? You seem distracted." Emma swallowed hard, her hands gripping the laundry basket. "I'm fine, Ryan." But he didn't move. Instead, he reached out and brushed his fingers lightly over her wrist. "You don't seem fine." The touch sent a jolt through her, and Emma yanked her hand back, standing abruptly. I need to finish this." Ryan didn't press her, but his eyes stayed on her as she gathered the clothes and hurried upstairs. She shut the bedroom door behind her, leaning against it as her heart raced. What was happening to her? Later that night, Emma couldn't sleep. She tossed and turned, haunted by the feeling of Ryan's touch and the look in his eyes. Finally, unable to take it anymore, she got up and padded down the hall for a glass of water. As she passed Ryan's room, she noticed the door was slightly ajar, and the soft glow of a lamp spilled into the hallway. She hesitated, then peeked inside. Ryan was sitting on the edge of the bed, shirtless, his head in his hands. He looked up when he saw her, and their eyes locked. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked softly. Emma's throat went dry. "No." He patted the bed beside him. "Want to talk?" Every rational part of Emma screamed at her to turn around and leave, but her feet betrayed her. She stepped inside and closed the door, sitting stiffly at the edge of the bed. Ryan leaned back, his gaze steady and unguarded. "You can tell me what's on your mind." Emma looked away, her hands trembling. "I don't know. Everything just feels off lately." Ryan shifted closer, his knee brushing against hers. "I feel it too," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Emma's breath caught as he reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her skin. "I don't know what's happening between us, but I can't stop thinking about you." Her pulse pounded in her ears. "Ryan, we can't. This is wrong." "Then why does it feel so right?" he asked, his voice low and intense. Before she could respond, Ryan leaned in, his lips brushing softly against hers. Emma froze, her mind screaming at her to pull away, but her body refused to listen. She melted into the kiss, her hands gripping his shoulders as the tension that had been building for weeks finally erupted. Ryan's hands slid down her back, pulling her closer as the kiss deepened. Emma's breath hitched, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to let go. When they finally broke apart, Ryan rested his forehead against hers, his breath ragged. "Tell me to stop," he whispered. But Emma couldn't. She shook her head, her voice trembling. "I can't." Ryan kissed her again, and this time there was no hesitation. Their hands explored each other, and Emma felt years of loneliness and longing melt away under his touch. As the night stretched on, Emma knew she was crossing a line she could never uncross. But in that moment, she didn't care. All she cared about was the way Ryan made her feel, alive, wanted, and understood. When the first light of dawn crept through the window, Emma lay tangled in Ryan's arms, her heart heavy with guilt and desire. She knew there would be consequences, but as she looked at him sleeping beside her, she couldn't bring herself to regret it. For the first time in years, she felt like someone truly saw her, and that scared her more than anything. The morning light filtered through the curtains, casting a golden hue over the room. Emma stirred awake, her body tangled with Ryan's. The weight of what had happened crashed over her like a tidal wave. She pulled away slowly, careful not to wake him, and slipped out of bed. Her heart pounded as she gathered her clothes, tiptoeing out of the room. In the safety of her bedroom, Emma locked the door and sank to the floor. What had she done? Her mind raced with images of Ryan's touch, his whispered words, and the heat that had consumed them. She pressed her hands to her face, fighting the tears that threatened to fall. But there was no time for regret. She had to pull herself together before David returned. Emma avoided Ryan all morning, pretending to be busy with chores and errands. But she felt his presence everywhere. The sound of his footsteps, the way his voice lingered in the air. By lunchtime, he cornered her in the kitchen. "Emma," he said softly, his eyes searching hers. "Are we just going to pretend last night didn't happen?" Her breath caught. "We have to, Ryan. It was a mistake." His jaw tightened. "Was it? Because it didn't feel like one to me." "Ryan, you don't understand." "No, you don't understand," he interrupted, stepping closer. "You think I don't know how lonely you are? How much you've been hurting?" Emma looked away, tears threatening to spill. "This can't happen again." Ryan reached out and cupped her face, forcing her to meet his gaze. "I don't believe that. And I don't think you do either." Before Emma could respond, the sound of a car pulling into the driveway shattered the moment. Her stomach dropped. David was home. Panic surged through her as she shoved Ryan away. "Go to your room," she hissed. Ryan hesitated, but the urgency in her voice sent him retreating upstairs just as David walked through the door. "Hey, honey," David called out, dropping his bags in the hallway. "Miss me?" Emma forced a smile and rushed to greet him, wrapping her arms around him in a hug that felt more like a shield. "Of course," she said, her voice trembling. David pulled back, studying her face. "You okay? You seem a little off." "I'm fine," she lied, avoiding his gaze. "Just tired." But David wasn't convinced. Over the next few days, his questions grew sharper. He noticed the way Emma avoided Ryan, the way Ryan looked at her when he thought no one was watching. It all came to a head one night when David walked into the living room and caught them sitting too close, their conversation too hushed. "What's going on here?" David asked, his voice hard. Emma froze, her heart slamming against her ribs. "Nothing. We were just talking." "Doesn't look like nothing," David shot back, his eyes narrowing. Ryan stood, trying to defuse the tension. "Uncle David, it's not what you think." But David wasn't having it. "Don't you dare try to defend this," he snapped, his gaze shifting between the two of them. "I knew something was off the moment I walked in that door." Emma's knees went weak. "David, please." "Don't," he cut her off. "Just tell me the truth." Tears spilled down Emma's cheeks as the weight of her guilt crushed her. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. David's face twisted with anger and betrayal. "How could you do this? In our home? With him?" Ryan stepped forward. "It's not her fault." Shut up," David roared, his voice echoing through the house. "You're not a victim here, Ryan. You're a liar and a manipulator." Emma tried to reach for David, but he pulled away. "Don't touch me," he said coldly. Ryan clenched his jaw, his fists trembling. "You don't understand what she's been going through." David's eyes darkened. "And you think that justifies this?" The room fell silent, the weight of the confrontation suffocating them. Finally, David turned to Emma. "I can't do this," he said, his voice breaking. "I need time to think." He grabbed his keys and stormed out, leaving Emma sobbing and Ryan standing helplessly by her side. As the door slammed shut, Emma felt her world shatter. She had crossed a line she could never uncross, and now everything was falling apart. Ryan tried to comfort her, but his touch only reminded her of the chaos they had unleashed. She pulled away, her voice trembling. "You need to leave, Ryan. Now." His face fell. "Emma." "No," she said firmly, wiping her tears. "This has to end." Ryan's eyes filled with pain, but he nodded and walked out without another word. Emma collapsed onto the couch, her body shaking with sobs. She had ruined everything: her marriage, her trust, and her sense of self. And now, she was left to pick up the pieces of the life she had destroyed. The house felt empty after Ryan left. The echoes of his laughter and the warmth of his presence had been replaced by an unbearable silence. Emma sat on the couch, staring at the blank television screen, replaying the events of the last few days in her mind. Shame and guilt coiled tightly around her, suffocating any sense of comfort. David hadn't returned that night. He hadn't even called. Emma checked her phone repeatedly, hoping for a message, but the screen remained dark. She knew he needed space, time to process what had happened. But the waiting only made her feel more broken. The following morning, Emma forced herself out of bed and into the shower, hoping to wash away the memories of Ryan's touch. But as the water poured over her, she couldn't stop thinking about how alive she'd felt with him. It made her hate herself even more. By midday, David's absence felt unbearable. Emma decided to text him. "David, I'm so sorry. Please come home so we can talk." Hours passed and still no reply. When night fell, Emma wandered into the guest room where Ryan had stayed. The faint scent of his cologne lingered in the air, and the bed was still unmade. She sat down, running her fingers over the sheets, and the weight of everything crashed down on her. She thought about what Ryan had said, that he saw her, that he understood her loneliness. And as much as she wanted to hate him, part of her longed for the connection they'd shared. But it wasn't real, she reminded herself. It couldn't be. By the third day, David finally called. "I need to talk to you," he said, his voice flat. "Come home," Emma pleaded. "No," he replied firmly. "Not yet. Meet me at the park." Emma's hands trembled as she hung up and got ready. When she arrived, David was already there, sitting on a bench. He looked tired, like he hadn't slept in days. Emma approached cautiously, her heart pounding. "David." He held up a hand, silencing her. "Don't. I just need you to answer one question." She nodded, bracing herself. "Why?" he asked, his voice breaking. "Why did you do it?" Tears welled in Emma's eyes. "I don't know," she whispered. "I was lonely. I felt invisible, David. And Ryan, he made me feel seen." David's jaw tightened. "So that's it? I work hard to provide for us, and you repay me by sleeping with my nephew?" Emma flinched at his words. "It wasn't like that." "Then explain it to me," he snapped, his voice rising. "I can't." Emma cried. "I don't have an excuse. I messed up. I betrayed you, and I hate myself for it." David fell silent, his shoulders slumping. "I loved you, Emma. I trusted you. I still love you," she said desperately, reaching for his hand. But he pulled away. "I don't know if I can forgive this," he said quietly. Emma's heart shattered. "Please, David, don't give up on us." He looked at her, and for a moment, she thought she saw a flicker of hope. But then he shook his head. "I need time," he said. "I'll stay at my brother's for now." Emma nodded, tears streaming down her face as he walked away. The days that followed were unbearable. Emma threw herself into work, avoiding calls and messages from Ryan. She knew she couldn't let herself slip back into his arms, no matter how much she missed him. But late at night, when the house was too quiet, she would replay their moments together, wondering if she'd made the right choice by pushing him away. David eventually came by to pack a bag. He didn't speak much, but before he left, he paused at the door. "I'm not saying this is over," he said, "but I need to figure out if I can trust you again." Emma clung to those words, but deep down, she knew things would never be the same. The betrayal had left a scar too deep to ignore. And as she lay in bed that night, staring at the empty space beside her, Emma realized that no matter what happened, she had already lost something she could never get back, herself. The days stretched into weeks, and the silence in the house grew heavier with each passing moment. Emma tried to focus on rebuilding her life, but no amount of cleaning, organizing, or pretending could erase the weight of her guilt. She had shattered the foundation of her marriage, and now all that remained was rubble. David stayed away, only checking in through brief text messages about bills and household matters. Each word felt colder than the last, and Emma feared that he was slipping further away with every day that passed. One evening, Emma sat in the dimly lit living room, staring at her wedding photo. She traced her fingers over the glass, remembering the day it was taken. The laughter, the promises, the love. She barely recognized the woman in the picture. How had she let herself become this person? She thought about Ryan and the fire he had reignited in her. For a moment, he had made her feel alive, but it had come at a cost too high to bear. It wasn't love. It was an escape, a desperate attempt to fill the void her marriage had left. And in the end, it had only made her feel emptier. One night, David showed up unexpectedly. Emma's heart raced as she opened the door. He looked exhausted, his eyes dark and distant, but there was a flicker of something else, maybe hope? "Can we talk?" he asked. Emma nodded, stepping aside to let him in. They sat in the living room, the tension thick between them. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," David began, his voice steady but strained. "About us. About what happened." Emma swallowed hard. And I'm angry," he said, his voice trembling. "I'm hurt, but part of me wonders if I share some of the blame." Emma's eyes widened. "David, no, this was my mistake." He shook his head. "I wasn't here, Emma. I made work my priority and left you alone. I thought providing for us was enough, but I didn't realize how much I was neglecting you." Tears streamed down Emma's face. That doesn't excuse what I did. I betrayed you. David reached for her hand, his touch hesitant but warm. Maybe we can fix this. It won't be easy, and I don't know if I can ever fully forgive you. But I'm willing to try if you are. Emma's breath caught. She nodded, squeezing his hand. I want to try. The road ahead wasn't clear, and the wounds they carried wouldn't heal overnight. But for the first time since that night, Emma felt a sliver of hope. She had learned the hard way that one moment of weakness could destroy everything she had built. The temptation had been intoxicating, but it had also been fleeting. Real love, the kind worth fighting for, wasn't about passion or excitement. It was about trust, commitment, and showing up even when things got hard. Emma vowed to be better, not just for David but for herself. And as David stayed a little longer that night, sitting beside her on the couch, Emma allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could find their way back to each other. What would you do if you were in Emma's shoes? Could you forgive betrayal? Or is trust something that can never be repaired? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'm dying to know how you'd handle this situation. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more gripping stories like this. You won't believe what's coming next, another shocking tale of secrets and forbidden desires.